Welcome back to Strategic Advice. I'm the host, Phil Haun. I'm a professor at the U.S. Naval War College and a visiting professor at Dartmouth this year, a visiting scholar. And I'm joined today with Jennifer Erickson from Boston College. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi. Well,
Hi. So first, a disclaimer that the views expressed today are our own and not from our respective institutions. And Jennifer is a associate professor at Boston College, and she is going to be giving us advice on efficient teaching techniques. As a reminder, we're in season 2 of Strategic Advice aimed at the lucky brand new assistant professors who now have the task of learning how to be efficient in their teaching as well as in their research. And so Jennifer has gone through that and she's graciously agreed to talk to us about that today. So over to you, Jennifer.
Great, Phil. I'm really happy to be here. I think this is a really important topic that I think we think about a lot as educators, whether we're new professors or we've been doing this for a while. I am a professor at Boston College, which is an institution that says it cares both about teaching and research, that it takes both of those things seriously and it expects its faculty to do both of those things well. And on the one hand, that's great because you spend so much time teaching that it's nice to see that rewarded in sort of the university system. At the same time, it's also kind of stressful because if you're expected to do both things well, two time-consuming things well, you got to figure out how to balance those. And that's really challenging. And that's something that I'm still working on today. I think I've been grading papers all weekend, and I think, man, I'm giving this talk on efficient teaching techniques, and I feel so inefficient sometimes when I'm grading papers. So I think this is something that we are learning and continuing to kind of improve on. I asked around, I asked some colleagues what they would say to this question. They said, well, obviously the answer is you should teach the same class over and over and over again, as many times as possible, teach it the same way for as long as you possibly can. And that's the way to teach effectively. And I think there's some truth to that. I'll talk about that a little bit. We want to minimize new preps to the extent that's possible for the kind of institution that you're at and their willingness to let you do that. But you do have to keep to department and university expectations. And there's a point in time where you might just get bored with the class that you're teaching too. This will also vary on the type of course that you're teaching. Is it a lecture course? Is it a seminar? Do you have teaching assistants or not? What are the expectations for good teaching in your institution? What are your university resources in general? So this is going to look a little bit different in how it plays out for people, but I think there are some tips that might be sort of generally useful across the board. The first thing I want to say is that you should know that your first year of teaching will be inefficient. There is kind of no way around it. And I think you should be kind to yourself and accept that this is going to be something of the reality. You're going to spend a lot of time on teaching because teaching new courses from scratch is really time consuming. And if you're teaching a full load, and that could be, for most of us, it's a 2-2, but it could be more than that. That's a lot of time. So you have to accept that. There are ways maybe to make it a little bit better. For example, I had notes that were given to me by faculty I had TA'd for as a graduate student. They said, feel free to use the lecture notes from this class that you've taught. In fact, here are some of my notes, or here are my slides. You can use these as you start your own class. If friends offer you notes or syllabi, feel free to take them and borrow from them. It will really help you figure out how to structure a class more efficiently, think about what readings might work or not work without going down the rabbit hole of sort of Google Scholar. It will help you put things together a little bit more quickly. Survival is key here, and this will help you survive. I also think that you can schedule prep times for yourself and say, realistic prep times, that I'm going to do course prep in these timeframes, schedule them as if they are meetings, treat them as if they are meetings, but only use that time that you've scheduled for yourself and try to not let it bleed over into other times that you might use. So I have my teaching days and I try to do my teaching prep on my teaching days, at least for my lecture courses. My seminar, because I want it fresher in my head for the actual reading material, I'll spread out over a course of a week, but I'll only do a little bit every day. So I think you have to find what works for your schedule, but stick to it and don't let it take over. And absolutely repeat teaching preps if they let you repeat them, because the more you teach something, the easier it will get, and you're not doing new preps every time. And that can be really challenging. So that's the first big thing. Just accept that inefficiency and do your best to work with it. Second, there's a lot of thought you can put into how you approach assignments and grading. I say this as somebody who's in the midst of grading 34 short papers. That takes a lot of time. I think grading is one of the biggest time consumers of our teaching experience, and probably one of the least satisfying ones. Especially if you don't have a TA, like I don't have this semester. I do think it's really useful to talk to other faculty in your institution about what the department norms are for the kinds of assignments that you can offer. If I gave out Scantrons in my department, they would have like dinged me at tenure time. This is not something they would be interested in seeing. They want more engaging exam and paper as kinds of assignments, which takes time to grade. So then you want to think about how to structure those in ways that you can get through reasonably efficiently. Students really like smaller things. They like to do lots of small assignments that sort of distribute the grade over the course of the semester, but that's really time consuming if you're constantly grading. And so given my student numbers, what I do for a lecture, which will have about 35 students in it, versus a seminar might look different because I can't spend a ton of time with a lot of lecture students working on a research paper, for example. I'll do shorter papers that are a little more formulaic that can grade more quickly. I personally tend to avoid group papers because of collective action problems, and I don't want to spend time mediating dramas between students. But if you have, 60 to 100 students, but you're also expected to have paper assignments, you might think that that's actually going to be a better solution to your grading problem, is to have fewer papers because you've had them work on them in a group. But find a format too that can travel over time. I have a paper assignment that I give that's a current events analysis where the structure of the paper is sort of the same, but I change the current event that they work on. So the paper is different every year. That helps with plagiarism issues and all sorts of things. A little more interesting for me. But it means I know how to grade it and I kind of know what those papers look like over time. Finally, structuring your assignments is really clear what you're looking for, that students know it and you know it when you're grading, can make that go a little bit more quickly too. Personally, in my big intro IR lecture class, I do one short paper, I do an in-class midterm, I do an in-class final. In-class is going to be more popular with AI issues also. And I don't do a lot of other assignments on top of that. And that's just for keeping up with the 60, 70 students I have. Even though I have TAs to grade them, I tend to go over that material too. So think about assignments and grading. Do something that's efficient that still fits with your department norms. Third, I find it really useful to make sure that my lecture and teaching notes from one year are available to me in the next year. So when I get ready to go into a lecture or into a seminar, I'll go over my notes, I'll mark it up with a pen, I'll make some notes on, how I might integrate current events or something. And then when I'm done with lecture, I might come back and say, ooh, that didn't work very well, or I didn't explain that clearly enough. And I'll stick a Post-it note on the physical paper file I have for that week, so that next year when I go back to teach the class again, I pull that file and I see a note that says, replace that reading with something else, or explain that more clearly, or add that in there. It makes the repeating of the class a lot more efficient in the future. If you ask me a year from now what I'm going to need to know about that class, if I didn't take notes on it, I might not have any idea. There's just so much information that comes in and out between those times. But if I keep my lecture notes together, I keep my readings with them, I make myself notes, I can use that to sort of quickly adapt the lecture for the next year rather than sort of trying to remember what I did or spending a lot of time on it. So reusing PowerPoints, reusing lecture notes, and taking notes on what worked or not, just briefly. I don't spend more than like a minute on this, but it really saves me time in the next year. Next, I also find planning in advance to some degree pretty useful. So I try to plan 2 weeks in advance, especially for my lecture classes, less so for my seminars. And that helps me better integrate ideas over the course of the semester, helps me sound knowledgeable about what's coming up in the future in the class, even if I haven't really figured it out yet. But it also creates a buffer that I think is really important if grading starts to take up too much time, or you have something happen, or you get sick. You still have your existing notes to fall back on, and it gives you a little wiggle room in case other things get too busy and you just can't manage it. So I think it's efficient in some ways to look ahead to the beginning of the semester. I'll prep 2 weeks of the semester. And then once the semester gets going, I'll just do the next week every week as we go. And then I end up finishing early too. And that's when the grading really hits. So it helps me balance my schedule out a little bit to do that kind of advanced prep work. Finally, and this is advice that I got from my dissertation advisor, and I think it's really great advice. If you're teaching seminars, and that could be undergrad seminars, that could be graduate seminars, design your new seminars around what you think your next research project is going to be. That means that for your class, you are doing reading that you needed to do anyway, but now it's scheduled into your schedule because you've got to show up and teach about it and sound knowledgeable about it. So it really forces you to like think about the body of work that you want to engage with, and it makes you engage with it, I think, in a much more detailed way, because undergraduates especially, but even the graduate students are reading things into readings that you might not think of. So when you're reading it, you have to read it a little more carefully, a little more thoughtfully. You have to think about how you're going to explain it to somebody else. You have to think about the questions you're going to get from that. And then you're going to have a really good discussion around those readings. So it's really valuable, I think, way of making your teaching time serve your research and hopefully be more engaging to you in the process. So that's what I've got.
Well, that's great. I really like that last one. I made a mistake once of building a course around a book I had just written.
Oh,
And I'd saved time, but it was completely backwards. And so ever since, when I pick a course based upon my reading for electives on my research interest, and it's much better that way. All right, well, this is some fantastic advice. So I have a question as far as, let's talk about teaching assistants.
Yeah.
How can you, because I've had research assistants before, and I'll be honest with you, I've never been efficient with them. How are you efficient with teaching assistants?
Well, I think it's a different kind of efficiency in some ways. So let me be clear. I get teaching assistants with my Intro to IR class because it has discussion sections in the spring. I don't have it with my other classes. And in some ways, it's less efficient for me because I see my job when I have teaching assistants is also teaching them how to teach, to be the kind of mentor of teaching that I had when I was a graduate student and take that role that my professors offered to me and give it to my graduate students. And I know they think it's very time consuming to do the job, but I hope that they're learning something in the process. So it takes a little bit more time in some ways because we're having a teaching assistant meeting. So once a week we get together, we talk about what are the challenges you're facing, what are you struggling with, what are the things the students really need to get out of the readings this week when it comes to discussion section. If they aren't that familiar with international relations, I want to make sure that they kind of understand the material that we're looking at. So we do that once a week. When it comes to grading, it's both helpful and not in some ways. Like if you have somebody grade something before you grade it, it gives you some context for how it sits relative to the other papers and kind of what the big issues are that's wrong with it. But I'm still grading everything that my TAs have graded, sometimes because they're less familiar with the material, in part because the way BC students have expectations of classes is that they will be graded by the professor and they won't be graded by TAs. So I think this sort of minimizes sort of grade complaints later in the semester. And so I read everything too. It goes a little faster, but it's also like usually in those semesters, like 60, 70 papers, that's hugely time consuming. So I don't know that helps me that much, but I think they get a smaller set of papers each, and hopefully they're learning a little bit from me how they can work their way through the material. When we write exams, I ask the TAs to submit what they think would be fair exam questions and answers so that we build the exam a little bit based on what their discussion sections are doing. That helps me be more efficient in writing the exams. When we grade exams, we have an answer key, but we also group grade a couple of exams. So we talk through sort of why did you give it that score? What can we agree? How much will we take off for something like this on an ID question? We'll spend several hours doing that so that the grading process that comes after for all of us can be more efficient, that we're all on the same page, that students are getting equal treatment. But but that involves a fair bit of time commitment on everybody's part there. And I think it's learning experience for the TAs, and I want them to have that experience so that they can go off in the world and do their own courses more efficiently or effectively. But I don't know if I'm using them as efficiently as I could. I could just hand off all my grading and say, please grade this and give it back to me. But I kind of don't feel like that's the kind of institution that I'm at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to know your environment.
Yeah.
I really liked your advice on scheduling prep time.
Yeah.
I also schedule grading time,
Yeah.
which is I give a certain amount of time on average per student. And the other
Yeah.
thing I've done is gone away from summative assessment, which
Hmm.
is here's why I give you a grade, to
Hmm.
formative assessment on here's how you can improve your thinking going forward.
Yeah.
Because the literature suggests that once a student sees their grade, they stop
It
thinking about what's
stop. It
written
doesn't matter how many
below.
comments you
It
wrote.
doesn't matter.
Mm-mm.
Exactly. Well, this is, we've come up against the amount of time. Again, a fantastic discussion. I can't thank you enough for the advice that you've given to brand new assistant professors who are being overwhelmed. And actually, this 15 minutes may seem like almost too much time for them. But I appreciate the amount of time, Jennifer, that you've given
This is
today to
great, Phil.
strategic advice.